a keynote speaker, I was very pleased when we got Aaron VanDevender to agree to be our keynote speaker, because we knew that in addition to being a real headline speaker, like Warner Miller, that he would bring not just an understanding of the quantum field and of the new breakthroughs that have come and are coming in the field of quantum computing, not just understand it from a scientific point of view, or understand it simply from a business point of view, but also from the point of view of the institution that he works for, and that is the fabled Founders Fund, the venture capital firm put together by Peter Thiel, among others, in order to begin to develop ways in which to shape investment, future investment, in the areas of high tech, in the areas of information technology, and so on. And that Aaron would bring to us in our discussion here for the course of our day some views on the way in which not only how the business models that are evolving, the new business models that are evolving through quantum computing, quantum cybersecurity, but also where the future lies. The future lies in terms of where the money is going to go, and where the future lies within these technologies as part of a larger framework beyond simply the industry itself. Now, Aaron VanDevender is the scientist in residence at the Founders Fund. He monitors the scientific impact of the portfolio, works with portfolio companies, assesses new technologies, and conducts his own research. And he can do this because he's got a very firm background and a very firm expertise in this area. He's designed single photon and single atom quantum computers in academia and at government, with the National Institute of Science and Technology, as a matter of fact. Advanced the quantum mechanical theory for microscopic black holes. Patented the fastest transparent optical switch, and is a co-inventor of Yocto technology. Am I pronouncing that correct? Yocto technology, which is named after the smallest unit prefix in the SI scale. The SI scale is what we used to call degrees Kelvin. He then developed next generation DNA sequencing technology at Halcyon Molecular. And his scientific interests encompass energy, which is one of the areas that I work in, biotech, nanotech, and computing, particularly quantum computing. He received an SB from MIT and a PhD in physics from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And in addition to his interest in entrepreneurial science, Aaron, I would point out, is also a professional skydiver. And he has agreed to stay after the conference to go out to Andrews Air Force Base and to give lessons for anyone who's interested in skydiving here for today. No, I actually made that part up. He hasn't agreed to do that. But anyway, it's a great pleasure and a great honor to have with us Aaron VanDevender.
All right, thank you very much, Arthur. It's very, very warm welcome. Very privileged to be speaking to you this morning. Let's see, are my slides available? Great, here we go. So I'd like to be talking about secrets, magic, and quantum computing, sort of three of the big resources that we use to drive a lot of the value in our society. So the first time that I heard about quantum computing, the idea of quantum computing, is 20 plus years ago. And it really struck me as the closest thing that we could come to a science fiction-like technology to be made real. And when I think about science fiction, more than being just about the future or being about space or being about science as research, it's really about how big ideas can impact and transform society, impact civilization. And so quantum computing is one of the few things that really has that ability to have a large-scale impact on civilization. And so if we're going to be thinking about quantum computing in science fiction sort of terms, I'd like to get a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, one of the great science fiction authors, who had 3 laws, with a third of which is the most well known. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, which provides great insight on what it must be like to, say, be a medieval person exposed to iPhones and 21st century technology and have no way to distinguish that from magic. Must seem pretty amazing. But actually, I'm going to say that this is wrong, that there is something very important that distinguishes magic and technology that Arthur C. Clarke missed. And to demonstrate that, first let's talk about a couple of examples of what we agree on as magic. So Luke Skywalker, the Star Wars universe, uses the Force, which is very clearly a magical power. In this example, he's trying to raise his X-Wing fighter out of the swamp under the tutelage of Yoda, and his ability in order to accomplish this feat is strongly correlated to his belief in the Force, and that he uses the power of that belief to conduct this action. We also have the elf coming down from the North Pole, trying to save Christmas. Santa has a sleigh that has this jet engine, but instead of being powered by kerosene or rocket fuel, it's powered by the belief in the Christmas spirit. And so the elf's job is to make sure that enough New Yorkers believe in the Christmas spirit to power Santa's sleigh, and so he can deliver all the presents. And then the best example of magic that I always come back to is that, of course, of Tinkerbell, who can only fly if enough people believe in fairies. So who here believes in fairies? Everyone clap if you believe in fairies. Okay, great. So the belief in fairies and expressing that through clapping drives the pixie dust to give her this magical ability. And so the thing that we see that distinguishes magic from technology is that it is powered by belief. You need core beliefs in order to make the magic work, and something that's not true for real technology. So cryptography, one of the basic technologies or tools that we have in our society, though, by this definition, is actually magic. It is not pure technology. That it requires belief in order for it to perform the functions that we use from it. So RSA, public key cryptography, was invented by Vest, Shamir, Edelman in 1977 at MIT. And they were playing with one-way functions from number theory, using prime numbers to create functions where you could separate the encryption key from the decryption key, and realized that this sort of scheme had lots of really great benefits for sharing secrets. So they got real excited about it, patented, and then after playing with it, realized that it had many other benefits, including not just sharing secrets, but also digital signatures and creating trust networks and all these other things. But that the core driving piece of it is that it's based on an unproven mathematical conjecture that large numbers are hard to factor into their primes. And there's no proof for this, but everyone believes it to be true. But that's sort of the essential element, is that this belief that it is a difficult thing. And if for some reason we were to stop believing that, then all of the tangible benefits that we derive from RSA, public key cryptography, would vaporize. So you can think of cryptography as a sort of machine that takes in the belief of the difficulty of this problem and turns it into security, turns it into trust, turns it into authentic transactions and relationships and the things that we derive tangible benefits from. But if something comes along that were to dispel that belief, then the whole edifice of public key cryptography would crumble. The math would still work. All of our computers would still be performing those calculations, but all of the tangible benefits that we derive from it would suddenly evaporate. Because if you can't trust the system, if you can't believe that large numbers are hard to factor, that these problems are computationally insolvable, then we would no longer be able to invest those resources into building up that infrastructure. Which, if you think about it, is a sort of a kind of crazy paradigm to have a technology that works and works very well, and we get lots of benefits from it, and then a new technology comes out that not just obsoletes it, but makes the old technology stop working. It would be sort of like Thomas Edison invents a light bulb, works for 100 years, lights up our homes, and then one day someone invents an LED light bulb, and you walk into a room and you flip a light switch and it doesn't work anymore. And the reason it stopped working is because we just stopped believing in light bulbs now that LEDs exist. Fortunately, light bulbs are not magic. They are just technology, so we don't have to worry about them stopping working just because something better comes along. But that is the risk when you build things based on magic and not based on pure technology. So the magic that we have, however, provides us lots of really great benefits. It was primarily designed to drive secret sharing, as cryptography systems are useful for, going back to Caesar using rotational codes to communicate with his generals, to the Enigma machine in World War II, and the ability to communicate securely and preserve secrecy has been extremely valuable, and a lot of work has sort of been driving most of the work in encryption over the years. However, I would say that actually this is the secondary benefit that we get from it. The ability to communicate secretly at this stage is less important than some of the other features that we get from cryptography. And the most important one is the trust. Being able to establish trusted relationships and have trusted and authentic communications with people out in the world and out on the internet is actually more valuable to society, more valuable to the internet than just being able to do things secretly. Most of the quantum cryptography and classical cryptography models, though, are sort of stuck in the old way of thinking about things that are very secrecy-centric instead of trust-centric. And so they always start out with this idea of Alice and Bob, where you have two parties who are trying to communicate with each other secretly, and then there's a third eavesdropper named Eve who is trying to listen in. And my caution is to be wary when this model comes up, because it is sort of overly simplistic and doesn't capture all of the nuance and value of the relationships and transactions and communications that we really want to have. So if we expend our resources just trying to provide or rebuild the existing Alice and Bob model, then we will come up with a technology platform that is insufficient for our needs, that doesn't actually give us all of the things that we expect from the cryptography systems that we have now. And that it's just too limiting. There's too many assumptions like, okay, I can have a classical and a quantum communication channel between Alice and Bob, but they're already authenticated. And so the trust relationship here is implicit. I don't actually have to solve for that using my quantum systems. And so that's something that we're going to need to address as we develop these architectures in the future. Digital signatures are the basis of that trust. They're the tool that we get from public key cryptography that allows us to have software updates that come onto our phones and make sure we don't have malware, where the Apple Store is signing each of the apps as before they get pushed into your phone, and so they can be authenticated, and we know that the software that we're running is authentic. It is what it says it is. And if you think about the mode of distribution, there is a broadcast mode. It's not a one-to-one Alice and Bob kind of thing. It's one-to-many. It's the Apple Store to the world. We don't care about preserving secrecy in that relationship because it's being broadcast to everyone. It's publicly distributed. But what we do care about is that it's authentic. That if someone tries to intervene, then there is not an opportunity for them to inject something corrupt. So all of that infrastructure, all of that artifice of cryptography and the public key infrastructure ends up in this green lock icon, which is, it seems like a very, it only takes a handful of pixels on our screen, but actually an enormous amount of infrastructure goes into making that little lock. But what I want to remind everyone is that this lock is not technology. It is actually magic. It is based on that artifice. The fact that we allow ourselves to send money to people, to transact with our bank, to transact with our loved ones, and that we put trust and we invest resources into it is all based on this, our belief that large numbers are hard to factor into the primes. And so if we stop believing that, or if something challenges that, then this green lock no longer works. It doesn't allow us to keep investing those resources into it anymore. And so we have to protect that. As Dr. Miller pointed out, Richard Feynman, one of the inventors and forefathers of quantum computing, came up with this idea. I noticed that we were getting a lot of benefit by using computers to model the physical universe, which works really great for classical physics, for doing Monte Carlo simulations and for solving systems of equations. But fundamentally, if you want to model the quantum mechanical universe, you're going to need a quantum mechanical computer. That a regular computer doesn't have the complexity to model the quantum mechanical universe. And so if you could build a quantum mechanical system that you could control with the same degree of flexibility that you could control a regular computer, you could use that to model other quantum systems and learn things about the quantum mechanical universe. So there have been a lot of debates recently about whether or not the universe that we are living in is a simulation or not. And people say things with very high sounding conviction. But I don't think that there's any way to really know whether we're living in a based universe or a simulation. But I will say that if we are living in a simulation, the computer that it's running on is definitely a quantum computer, right? Which might tell us that the universe, the actual base universe has quantum physics that is very similar to our own, and that it can pass through onto the quantum simulation that we are running on. Be that as it may, the quantum simulation or the quantum universe that we are in lets us do some pretty amazing things. So Peter Shor developed this algorithm in 1994, and it allows a quantum computer, as sort of described by Feynman, to be able to factor large numbers into their primes. And so sort of challenges that belief that our cryptography systems are based on. And it does this by transforming a factoring problem into a periodicity problem, by looking for if you have a wave or you have a signal, how often does it repeat? And that sort of kind of wave kind of question is something that quantum computers are very good at answering. And so he came up with this algorithm that can exponentially faster answer those kinds of questions than a classical computer can. And so although this was the first quantum algorithm to really be proposed or be written, it will probably be one of the last ones to be run. And that as we are developing quantum computers, and now they'll have a handful of bits, and we expect that to grow as we develop the technology and scale it more, the size of quantum computer that you need to solve the factoring problem is still quite large, even by quantum computer standards, even though it's exponentially faster than a classical computer. So the expectation is that we will run sort of quantum simulations, quantum chemistry, some of the other algorithms first on smaller quantum computers as they build up, but eventually we will get to that place where an RSA-size key is able to be factored by a quantum computer, and so that's where we are heading. So that sort of tells us that quantum mechanics is a little bit like alcohol in this sense, and that it is both the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. It creates a lot of difficulty for us in that we've built this public key infrastructure on the internet. Quantum mechanics comes along and smashes that, but it also gives us a lot of really great tools for building new systems that allow us to have secret and authentic communications with each other and with people in the public and on the internet. But unfortunately, or fortunately, they look very different and have very different properties. And so as we make that transition, we have to keep some of those things in mind. So one of the first technologies that we were able to develop that used the quantum properties to give us some of the benefits of public key cryptography, although in a very different mode, is quantum key distribution, as developed by folks like Charles Bennett, Giles Broussard, Arthur Eckert, several other folks. It's very great for secrecy in that the guarantees that it makes about having a communication between two folks, as long as you sort of follow the rules of the protocol, are absolute. There are no unproven mathematical conjectures at the heart of quantum key distribution the way that there are at the heart of RSA. That it only relies on derivable math and experimentally verified physics, and there's nothing else in there. Which we feel very secure about. So we would classify quantum key distribution as not magic, that it is definitely in the technology technology category. So it's really great for secrecy. The problem is that it's kind of difficult for trust. So quantum mechanics fundamentally has some very unique features that make it great for secrecy, including the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which says that you can't measure both the position and the momentum of a particle at the same time. And so it sort of tells us that the universe is very good at keeping secrets, that quantum mechanics puts fundamental limits on what is knowable in the universe. And so those limits are usable, are leverageable by us in designing protocols to keep secrets from other folks. And so that gives us a very, very strong kind of guarantee when we are exchanging secrets with each other, because we have the universe at our back. We're using the universal mechanisms, the quantum mechanical mechanisms for secret keeping in our favor. On the other hand, though, quantum mechanics also has a principle called the no-cloning theorem. The no-cloning theorem states that quantum states can't be copied. So unlike, say, if I write a number down on a piece of paper and I hand it to you, it's very easy for you to copy that number onto another piece of paper and go and distribute it. But in quantum mechanics, that's not possible. If I hand you a quantum state, a fully coherent quantum state, it is not possible to make an exact copy of that without destroying the first one. And so that prevents a lot of the normal modalities of communication that we are used to. The sort of one-to-many kinds of modalities where being able to copy and distribute information is so core to how we do things like digital signal distribution and public key infrastructures. And so those kinds of architectures can't be applied to quantum protocols because the no-cloning theorem prevents those quantum states from being copied. In fact, just this week, there was a flaw found in the WPA2 protocol, which is the sort of normal authentication, enterprise level authentication that all of our Wi-Fi devices use. And the way the attack works is a key replay attack. So during the handshake process, an attacker can replay the key during the protocol and cause the key to be loaded into a known state. If we were using quantum Wi-Fi, this would not be a problem. The key replay attacks would be ruled out because of the no cloning theorem. So it's great for that kind of like secrecy, but it causes problems for some of the trust. When we're trying to build the public key infrastructure that we have, where we have registrars signing signatures, and so when you know that I go to a website and I create a relationship with a new person that I've never transacted with before, this is a very difficult thing to do because of with the no cloning theorem, and that prevents the kind of distributing of the quantum states. If I try and engineer my way around that by just creating many copies of the quantum state and distributing those myself, then an attacker can go and collect all those up and use algorithms like quantum state estimation and quantum tomography and sort of negate a lot of the benefits that I had from making this be a quantum protocol from the begin with. So those things are sort of at odds with each other, and so we have to be extra clever about how we design our trust infrastructure. Another interesting feature that quantum computing has, that the quantum mechanics has, that we have to keep in mind as we are developing our new secrecy and trust infrastructures is this idea that it is reversible. That unlike in, say, a normal computer, if I have some input and I have some output and I know what the steps were, that with a quantum algorithm, if I know the steps and I know the output, I can always run the steps back in time to get the input. That there it has this sort of time reversal symmetry sort of property, which doesn't really, which we don't see in classical computing. In fact, you can kind of think of it like a Rubik's Cube, where all of my quantum computations are simple rotations. I can represent them as rotations in some very large dimensional space. And so if I start with a Rubik's Cube that's jumbled up, and I do some rotations to it, and I solve it, and I give it to someone, and I tell them what the rotations were, they can just undo each of them one by one and hand it back to me, and I will have the same jumbled state that I started with. Which is not possible with just a regular classical computer program. And in fact, the fact that it's not possible is something we rely on in cryptography, where we have one-way functions. We have hash functions that are fully avalanched. All the bits depend on the other bits, but it's computationally impossible to go backwards, even if I know what all the steps that were taken were, and I know what all of what the out steps were. Because in classical information, in classical computing, information gets erased along the way. It gets thrown off as heat. And in quantum computation, that doesn't happen. There's sort of nothing wasted, so it's very efficient. But at the same time, if I'm using that heat, that erasure as part of the benefit of my algorithm, then it's not going to show up. So I have to be aware that when I'm designing my system, I can't just simply upgrade the algorithms I already have into the quantum world, because doing so would make them reversible and therefore not useful for the same kinds of quantum primitives that we're accustomed to. So one of the ways that this really shows up is with the Bitcoin network. We're already deriving a huge amount of tangible benefits from being able to transact and have exchanges of value with people on the internet with no trusted third parties. But the protocol was designed on classical computation, on public key infrastructure as we understand it today, and has some features that we need to be aware of. So the mining of new coins of Bitcoin is based on the 256 hash algorithm. This turns out actually to be vulnerable by a quantum algorithm called Grover's algorithm. However, it doesn't give us an exponential speedup. It's only a sort of quadratic speedup. So it's probably not the fundamental vulnerability for the Bitcoin network from quantum computing. However, the Bitcoin transactions, if I move something from one account to another account or one address to another address, those are signed, those are authenticated with RSA public key keys. And so once I move money from one account to another, then an attacker could see that transaction, get my private key, and then all of the remaining money in that account would then be vulnerable. They could come and make a new transaction and steal it. So I could imagine perhaps sort of engineering myself around this, where although Bitcoin itself, as we understand it now, is definitely magic, we sort of have a reduced magic version of it, where maybe I only use each one of my private keys once and then move everything to a new address. And so even if someone figures out my private key later, because the quantum computer just takes a little bit of time, they won't be able to make use of that. It would be a very cumbersome system. It would be like every time you go to the ATM and you withdraw $20, you would have to close your account and move all of your money to a new account. So no one would, because that account would be vulnerable from then on. So you could kind of figure out a way to do it. But a much better approach would be to sort of just table the architecture that we have now for Bitcoin and think about how should we be really moving money around if instead of trying to fight against the quantum principles and fight against what the quantum computer represents, actually use the quantum principles in our favor. And so that's this idea of quantum money. This was actually sort of first proposed by Stephen Weisner in the 70s, perhaps maybe the first real quantum algorithm or study in quantum information before anybody took any of this seriously or really had any idea that any of this was really possible, as a sort of thought experiment that what if you could use things like the no cloning theorem to provide counterfeit protection for your money? So then instead of fighting against the quantum properties and fighting against the quantum computer, we now have quantum mechanics working for us, where we say that if I'm printing my money, then the no cloning theorem prevents anyone else from stealing it or prevents anyone else from copying it. And so now we have to figure out to develop protocols of what's the best way to validate that the money that I have is really authentic, but knowing that the safety and security of it is backed by quantum physics. And so this is something exciting that we have to look forward to, and that we can have a money exchanging system on the internet that is extremely secure, and maybe more importantly, that is not magic, that is just based on real technology, on physics and derived math. So in the post-quantum world, it is still going to be useful if for a while for us to develop algorithms and systems that have some of the features and benefits of things like RSA that give us secrecy and trust, but are maybe not as vulnerable to quantum attacks, to quantum computers. Lots of proposals for these things out there, lattice codes, error correcting codes, multivariate codes. I would like to point out, however, that even though there are no known quantum algorithms that can solve these things, although Peter Shor and others are working very hard to try and change that, that all of these things are still magic, that they are still based on unproven conjectures, that certain problems are very difficult to go one way more than they are the other. And so there's still that risk. While we're in this transition zone, it's still to keep cognizant in mind that new algorithms can come along, new algorithms will be developed, the quantum computers will get much bigger, much faster. And so as we are looking to build the trust and communication and security networks of the future, we should be trying to at least go to stronger versions of magic, but ideally move off of magic and start using real technology. So this is a sketch from Isaac Newton's notebooks about the Philosopher's Stone, which was sort of the core piece of magic behind alchemy. He gave it a shot, played around with it, maybe learned some things about chemistry in the process, but eventually had to give it up. And it sort of points to perhaps that a lot of these things that we're basing our cryptography systems that are magic live in the kind of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which says that there must be things in math that are true but not provable. Unfortunately, we never really know what those things are, so it's hard to kind of count on them. But the idea is that Newton went through this transition period of looking at magic and exploring it and learned a lot of things from there, but eventually moved off of that and got into real science. And so I hope that we can make a similar transition. We've rubbed the lamp. We made some wishes. We got some really great benefits out of public key cryptography. But now that quantum computers are starting to become a real possibility, that we need to be cognizant of that and how we build our system. So I'm going to end back where I started with Arthur C. Clarke. So we started with his third law. This one is his second, which I think is probably a little bit more true. So the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. It's Arthur C. Clarke's second law. And so that's what I'd like us to do here today. Looking forward to that is a little bit past what we think the impossible is with developing quantum computers and figure out where that boundary is. So, thank you very much.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much. I think it's worth taking some questions, don't you? We'll do our first panel, then we'll just bump it up to a 10:30 start. I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first one, though, and that is what I find fascinating about your discussion is that if we're going to be talking about a post-quantum cryptography era and then a quantum-driven cryptography era, that what you're going to have is a situation in which the belief in the impregnability of the old system is going to be destroyed by the appearance of the quantum computer, which can crack those unprovably impossible to solve problems. It's going to shatter the sense of trust and belief in the old RSA-based encryption system. But then comes a new challenge, which is to build a sense of trust and belief in a QKD-based system as well, because institutions that you go to, you just sort of said, your cryptography system is now trash. It's now gone, blown away. And they're going to say, and you're telling me you've got a system now that's better when you just told me my old system, which I rested on for all these years, is no good? And what you're suggesting is not just a question then about science or engineering or even building great algorithms. It's also an informational and even a public relations issue, which says now you'll have a system you can really trust going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would think it's good to keep in mind that the transition doesn't happen all at once, and that it's always good to think about it in economic terms. So you have a sort of threat model of who you're trying to defend against. So at the beginning, quantum computers are going to be, right now they don't exist at that scale that we know of, but eventually they will. But at first they will be just like kind of state actor level enterprises where it'll cost multi-billion dollar pieces of engineering in order to make that work. And so if you are trying to defend against that level of attacker, there's probably other things you need to worry about besides a quantum computer coming along. And so from just, your people being arrested, usually the sort of human vectors of attack are the most vulnerable. And so making sure that those are secure relative to a state level actor is first. And then as the cost of quantum computing comes down and it becomes more accessible to lower and lower levels of attackers, then you sort of get to the point where you will need to transition off of that onto like a quantum key distribution kinds of architectures. And so for each individual application, keeping in mind the threat level and saying, okay, right now the price is infinity, and saying like, but as long as a quantum computer is more than $10 billion, the thing that I'm protecting is worth less than that, and so it's okay. I can still wait a little bit, maybe to move off of it. But once the cost of the quantum computer is cheaper than the value of the attack, then it's time to move.
I'm going to take a couple of questions, and then we're going to set up our first panel. And I'll take the question here, the gentleman there. Why don't you use the microphone? If you could just identify yourself and your affiliation, and also my team will be very happy with me if I just remind you that cell phones should be on mute from this point on as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Tanner Johnson. I'm a senior research analyst with Janes by IHS Markit, doing some substantial research in cybersecurity efforts. And as you mentioned, Bitcoin, I was curious about your take on the blockchain has trust inherent and inbuilt into the system, and so it doesn't require the belief component, not necessarily. So would there be something such as a quantum blockchain that has that level of trust built in automatically that doesn't require prior communication, prior relationship development ahead of time?
Yes. So I would say that that's what we want to get to. We want to have a network that is similar to Bitcoin in that it allows people to transact with no trusted third parties, but it only relies on experimental physics, on quantum physics and math, and not on any of these unproven conjectures about prime numbers. And so we're not really there yet, but it's definitely something that is an active area of research that people are thinking about. But the part of that question is like, in order to do that, what are the computational resources that you would take? What does it take to be a node on the quantum Bitcoin network? And we don't know that yet. It might be like with a QKD system where actually the requirements are very low. I don't need a general purpose quantum computer to just exchange quantum key distribution type secrecy. But maybe for a quantum Bitcoin network, I do, or like the bar is a little bit higher. So we're still trying to figure that out of exactly what are the resources required to make that work. It's an active area of research, and we'll look forward to how it goes. But what we can say right now is that it is going to have some features that are somewhat different, that it's not going to be a straightforward upgrade from just the Bitcoin to quantum Bitcoin, because some of the features of quantum mechanics are incompatible with the way that public key cryptography systems work today.
And then we have a question here.
Hi, I'm Charles Harvey with American Defense International. I have a question on, the Founders Fund is known for investing right at the edge of magic. In the quantum realm, what have you turned down in the quantum area for investment, and what types of quantum investments would you all look at pursuing?
Yeah, so we turned down a lot of things. And I would say that it's hard to get into specifics on this one, but let me characterize it for you. The way that we see it is that when things are purely in the sort of research phase, that they feel very expansionary, that as we do more research and we answer questions, each new result we get inspires 2 or 3 more questions. So the number of questions that you have altogether, the sort of space of possibilities that you're operating in it, continues to expand, maybe even exponentially. And then at some point, you reach an inflection point where now, as you are answering questions, instead of adding branches to your tree of possibilities, you're pruning them, and things are starting to converge. And so where we like to invest is right around that inflection point where we've said, okay, we've mapped out now what the space of possibilities are. We can sort of look down the road and see what the future is. We're probably not adding too many more branches now, and we're really starting to prune them so we can converge on an actual executable emergent technology that we think can have an impact.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze in one more, and then we really want to move on to the next panel.
Thank you very much. Paul Joyle, NSI. I'd like to ask you if you've thought to the edge of the use of quantum for the applications of C-cubed I battlefield communications on the defensive side and on the offensive side, electronic warfare.
Yes, certainly. So I would say that we have thought a lot about that, and for the battlefield, we think that being able to support quantum communications via satellite links is a very important part of that. And so thinking about how would you build a quantum communications infrastructure that can be space-based, which is very difficult because in order for you to have transparent quantum links through a satellite, you need to be able to transmit single photons. So be able to, with high fidelity, transmit one photon and reliably have it received from the satellite and then to the other side, wherever the destination is, and go through all of the atmosphere, worry about interference from the sun, which is, putting out 10 to the 14 sorts of photons, kinds of things. And so the signal to noise problems are extremely difficult, but the benefits of doing that, of having that level of sensitivity that gets you something that is not spoofable and not jammable, we think would be super important for those applications. And offensive electronic warfare, I don't think we have any particular take on that. It's most of the benefits that you get from making something quantum and and overcoming the challenges of that are more on the defensive side.
I want to thank both of our speakers for wonderful presentations.